Hello, everybody. Spiritual abuse is a quiet violence that hides inside prayers, sermons, and sacred texts. It uses the language of faith to control, shame, and silence. It turns sanctuary into a courtroom and scripture into a leash. This video will cover what traces the harm, names the tactics, and to offer concrete ways families, faith leaders, and communities can respond to survivors so that they can reclaim both safety and spirit. Spiritual abuse is a form of emotional and psychological abuse in which religion, spirituality, or faith practices are used to dominate, manipulate, or isolate a partner. It can be explicit threats of divine punishment, forced religious practices, or using scripture to justify violence. Or it can be subtle, like insisting the survivor submit or framing the abuser's demands as spiritual duty. Researchers and practitioners increasingly recognize spiritual abuse as a distinct form of coercive control within intimate partner violence. Common forms include scriptural coercion, quoting or misinterpreting sacred texts to demand obedience or silence, clerical manipulation, using clergy or religious authority to validate the abuser's control or to pressure the survivor to stay, spiritual isolation, forbidding contact with faith communities, mentors, or family members who might offer support, shaming and moral condemnation, telling the survivor that they are sinful, unworthy, or responsible for the abuse, and forced rituals or practices, compelling prayer, confession, or religious acts as punishment or surveillance. Spiritual abuse is rarely a single act. It is a pattern that reinforces other abusive tactics, legitimizing violence. The abuser frames physical or emotional harm as deserved correction or spiritual discipline, weaponizing forgiveness, demanding forgiveness as a condition for safety, then repeating the abuse. Outing and threats. Threatening to expose private confessions, sexual history, or identity to the community. Gatekeeping spiritual resources. Controlling access to clergy, counseling, or religious education to keep the survivor dependent. Using ritual as surveillance, requiring confessions or public displays of pity that reveal vulnerabilities the abuser can exploit. These tactics work because faith is intimate and identity forming. When faith is corrupted, the survivor's moral compass and social supports are undermined. Spiritual abuse attacks the parts of the person that are most sacred, their conscience, community, and sense of meaning. The harm is layered. Identity erosion. Survivors may internalize blame, believing they are morally defective. Social exile. When faith communities side with the abuser or remain silent, survivors lose crucial social and emotional support. Legal and practical barriers. Survivors may be counseled to forgive and reconcile, delaying safety planning or legal action. And compound trauma. Spiritual betrayal can deepen grief, shame, and existential despair, in ways that clinical language alone doesn't capture. Evidence shows spiritual abuse is associated with significant emotional and trauma related impacts. Real world examples. He told her God wanted her quiet. He read verses like verdicts and called them mercy. When she whispered fear, he said it was sin. When she when she reached for the church door, he locked the car and said, "We will pray at home." When she cried to the pastor said, "Marriage is sacred, work it out." When she left, he told the congregation she abandoned her vows. These are not parables, they are patterns. Several systemic and cultural factors make spiritual abuse hard to address. Misunderstanding by professionals. Police, courts, and some service providers may not recognize spiritual coercion as abuse. Cultural difference to religious authority. Communities may prioritize institutional reputation over survivor safety. Survivor fear of spiritual loss. Leaving an abusive partner can feel like leaving faith itself, especially when the abuser claims spiritual ownership. Lack of tailored services. Many shelters and hotlines are not equipped to address faith based trauma or to coordinate with culturally competent clergy. These barriers mean survivors often stay longer, suffer more, and heal more slowly. Faith communities are uniquely positioned to protect or to harm. The difference lies in training, accountability, and theology that centers safety. Educate leaders. Clergy and lay leaders should learn to identify spiritual abuse and to separate pastoral care from coercive control. Adopt safety first policies. Congregations should have clear protocols for responding to disclosures, including immediate safety planning and referrals to secular services. Create confidential pathways. Offer private, trauma informed pastoral counseling that does not pressure survivors to reconcile. Hold abusers accountable. Spiritual authority must not shield abusive behavior. Accountability structures are essential. Support survivor autonomy. Affirm the survivor's right to make decisions about faith, family, and safety without coercion. A faith community that protects abusers is not protecting faith, it is betraying it. There is some practical guidance for survivors and allies. This is what offers concrete, trauma informed steps that respect both spiritual needs as well as safety. You can document spiritual coercion. Keep notes of sermons, messages, or directives used to control you. Record dates, witnesses, and content. Seek confidential counsel. Find clergy or spiritual mentors outside the abuser's network who understand abuse dynamics. Build a safety plan that includes spiritual needs. Identify safe places for worship, trusted leaders, and rituals that sustain you without exposing you to harm. Protect digital and religious records. Secure emails, messages, and online accounts that could be used to shame or control you. Connect with culturally competent advocates. Some domestic violence programs specialize in faith-based abuse and can bridge spiritual and practical support. These steps are about survival and about reclaiming spiritual agency. Laws and policies are beginning to catch up, but gaps remain. Recognition of coercive control. Some jurisdictions now recognize patterns of coercive control that include spiritual manipulation. Advocacy for broader legal definitions continues them. Training for responders. Police, judges, and social workers need training to see spiritual abuse as part of domestic violence. Faith-sensitive services. Funding and policy should support programs that integrate spiritual care with safety planning and legal advocacy. Policy change matters because spiritual abuse often intersects with custody, protective orders, and community standings. Healing from spiritual abuse is both psychological and spiritual work. It often requires trauma-informed spiritual care. Clergy trained in trauma can help survivors reframe faith in ways that restore dignity and agency. Rituals of separation and reclamation, ceremonies, prayers, or symbolic acts can mark the end of coercion and the start of self-authorship. Community reintegration. Safe, affirming spiritual communities help survivors rebuild trust. Therapeutic support. Counselors who respect spiritual identity and understand religious trauma are essential. Narrative repair. Survivor benefits from reclaiming their stories, naming the abuse, and rejecting theologies that justified harm. Healing is not a return to what was. It is the creation of the faith that protects and empowers. Spiritual abuse thrives in silence and difference. It dies when communities choose safety over reputation and compassion over dogma. Leaders adopt policies, get trained, and prioritize survivor safety. Families listen without judgment, document what you hear, and offer practical help that respects spiritual needs. Neighbors believe disclosures, refuse to normalize spiritual coercion, and support survivors' access to both secular and spiritual resources. When faith protects the vulnerable, it becomes what it claims to be. Spiritual abuse is a betrayal of the sacred. It takes the language of love and turns it into a chain, but naming the abuse strips it of secrecy. Teaching communities to recognize spiritual coercion builds lifelines. Training leaders to respond with safety and humility restore trust. Supporting survivors in ways that honor both their spiritual and practical needs helps them reclaim their whole selves. What steps will you take in your community to ensure faith is a refuge, not a weapon?